It says we are live. Welcome, everybody. This is a dual broadcast, sort of, with LDS Faith Journeys. Oh, you know what? And Gospel Tangents. I was going to put in my Faith Journeys logo in there, and I forgot. But oh well, I'll put it in on the other side maybe later. So anyway, welcome, everybody, to Gospel Tangents. Go ahead and let me know you're here. I thought today I would do something that I've never done before. They asked me to teach priesthood next week. And so June is an important month with regards to the Melchizedek Priesthood restoration, as well as the priesthood ban restoration. And so that's what we're going to be talking about next week. And also, somebody reminded me that this weekend, let's see, today's the 21st, so next week will be the 20th. So on Saturday will be the whatever, I hate to say anniversary, the commemoration of Joseph Smith's death in Carthage jail on June 27th, 1844. I will be talking the day after. This was actually something I've been trying to do for a couple of months. But anyway, I've finally gotten down to it. And anyway, so I'm going to give you my lesson a week early. So anyway, good to see that Cub Master 1028 is here. Hi, Rick from Evans, Georgia. Welcome, Cub Master. And Wendy Rowland, hello from California. I love your show. Thank you. That always makes me happy when I hear those things. So thank you. Glad to have you on board. I have to tell you something funny that happened this week. I was at Benchmark Books for Jeff Strong's, had a book signing at Benchmark Books, and this guy came up to me and he goes, "Now, who are you?" And I said, "My name's Rick Bennett." And he goes, "You sound familiar." And I go, "Yeah, listen to my podcast, Gospel Tangents." And he gave me a big hug and he goes, "I love your podcast." So anyway, fantastic. So let's dive in. And if you guys have questions or comments throughout this presentation, go ahead and ask those. I've got a monitor, so I might be able to look at these. Here we go. Stan Jukes. Hey, from Raleigh, North Carolina. I love the show most of the time. What do you mean most of the time? You can't love everything like all the time. Anyway, no, that's great. That's good to have you on here, Stan. So we're going to talk about the unfolding power of the Melchizedek priesthood. This is sort of a request by one of my neighbors. One of his big concerns was about on the restoration of the Melchizedek priesthood. And so I'm kind of doing this for him, and also with June being the priesthood restoration, I thought it would be fun to share some stuff that I've learned over time. So anyway, messengers of the higher priesthood following the Aaronic Priesthood restoration. Now we all have a really good date for that. It's May 15th, 1829. Yeah, that's right. So that was a year before the church was restored. On April 6, 1830, Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery were visited by John the Baptist for the Aaronic priesthood. And then most of us think it was just a month later, they were visited by Peter, James, and John. We're going to find out that date's actually a little bit disputed. I will tell you something interesting. Most of the information I'm getting is from Michael Quinn's Origins of Power, and we're going to go into the dating and that kind of stuff. And we're going to find out why there's some discrepancies. So the physical visitation would confer the Melchizedek priesthood and the keys of the apostleship. And we've got a hymn there, hymn verse there. So anyway, the thing that we should realize, in the early church, the authority was much more flat and functional, not hierarchical like we have on the left side there. So on April 6, 1830, there were only 6 people that were there on the first day. I know Joseph and Oliver were the first and second elders. The other people are not clear who was there. I did an interview with Michael Marquardt about that. And so it probably makes sense, but the church wasn't organized. We didn't have a first presidency on April 6, 1830. There were elders. Joseph and Oliver were elders. The priest was actually Martin Harris. He was the oldest person there, but he was the priest. The teacher was Christian Whitmer. He was older than the elders, Oliver and Joseph. And then the youngest, Samuel Smith, was also an elder despite being Joseph's younger brother. So the elders are kind of younger. They should be called youngers, right? But at any rate, the point is there were no deacons at first. Those came later. But the modern view is we've got deacons, teachers, priests, elders, high priests, and then the first presidency. But of course, April 6, 1830, we didn't have any of that. It was more of a flat structure. And so Michael Quinn has suggested that there were three possible dates that we should have for the restoration of the Melchizedek priesthood. So the traditional one, the one that most people know, although it doesn't actually have a date, but Quinn has said it is June 2nd, 1829. So that's kind of the traditional date. It's a few weeks after the restoration of the Aaronic priesthood. Date number 2 is July 6th, 1830. That deals with a nighttime escape, which we'll get into more details on that. And then hypothesis 3 is June 8th, 1831, over a year after the Aaronic priesthood was restored. We have Joseph says this is the first conferral of the Melchizedek priesthood, so that's kind of weird. So let's dive into a little bit more of these. So the June 2nd, 1829 date, that's the kind of the traditional narrative. The assumption is based immediately following the Aaronic priesthood restoration on May 15th, 1829. And so this date was actually inserted later in Doctrine and Covenants 27, but it lacks contemporary diary information. And so there's a question about how good that date is. Now, on July 6th, 1830, Erastus Snow has an account that he says the apostles, Peter, James, and John, appeared in dawn when Joseph and Oliver were weary and worn. Joseph and Oliver were fleeing persecution between Colesville and Harmony. And so that would actually, as we'll see on the next slide, probably has the most support. So that's almost 3 months after, 3 months to the day after the restoration of the church on April 6, 1830. And then in a special church conference, multiple contemporary accounts state that the authority of the high priesthood was manifested and conferred, quote, for the first time. And so that one has a lot of support as well. So hypothesis 3, the third date there, relies on the literal accounts from the June 1831 conference, and it relies on the official record but creates tension with modern theological expectations. At the June 1831 conference, the authority of the Melchizedek priesthood was manifested and conferred for the first time upon several elders. That's according to the Joseph Smith's 1838-39 official history, and I believe that's the one that's in the Pearl of Great Price. So decades later, Assistant Church Historian B.H. Robert added a footnote explicitly denying the literal text, saying that, quote, the prophet, quote, does not mean that the Melchizedek priesthood was given for the first time, even though that's what all the accounts say. So that's kind of interesting. And so while, I know some people I know my neighbor has a little bit of concern about that. But to me, the bigger concern is the removal of priesthood restriction, of priesthood from black members of the church, as well as the women. A lot of times we leave out the women. So it's pretty well accepted that from 1852 to 1978, men of black African descent were restricted from priesthood ordination, and black members were restricted from temple ordinances. So as the church has expanded globally, this barrier became deeply painful for faithful members of African descent. Past explanations advanced to justify the restriction. The curse of Cain, premortal valiance, are entirely disavowed today. So let's see here. We've got a few things here. Nabosa Meyer says, hey, Rick, the priesthood passes father to son. It never left the earth, according to section 86. Okay, well, I don't know how that squares with the restoration of the church. Maybe you can give me some more details on that one. And then Stan Juke says, love your shows with prominent, less famous Mormon groups. I've learned a lot from your show. Thank you. Glad to hear that. All right, so I want to dive deep. I'm actually writing a paper, and so you're kind of getting some of the stuff. I actually gave a Sunstone presentation about 13 years ago and presented some of this information there, but I've been working on updating it, and I'm hopefully going to get it published. So I want to highlight some early black men with known to have priesthood. And so Black Pete is the first. There's no record of anybody earlier than here. Baptized in December of 1830. Can't get much sooner than that. So just about 8 months after the church was organized, he was soon after in February, he was on a mission, and he was a freed slave who became one of the earliest black converts. He served a mission in Ashtabula County, Ohio in 1831. It's recorded in newspapers there. There's Mark Staker has done some amazing work in his book, Hearken, O Ye People. I would say Mark Staker is the best authority on Black Pete. And so if you want more details, you can go there. That's where I got all that information from. Elijah Abel, probably the best known black member. There's actually a picture there of Elijah Abel. He was baptized in 1832, served also as a missionary and as a 70. He was ordained an elder in 1836. He received the Kirtland Temple washing and anointing and served 3 missions for the church. One was in Canada, one was in Cincinnati, Ohio. I can't remember the third one. But anyway, leaders openly acknowledged him as a colored brother. And so he's got an obituary in the Deseret News. Most people, if you know about early black Mormons, have heard of Elijah Abel, probably the most famous. Russell Stevenson has written a biography on Elijah Abel called For the Cause of Righteousness. Fantastic book. I interviewed Russell years ago. And so that's probably the best biography of Elijah Abel. Now, Joseph Ball is an interesting person. He was also baptized in the year 1832, and he served as a high priest. Now, back 13 years ago when I gave my presentation at Sunstone, I know for a fact that his father was from Jamaica, and he has so-called black blood. But apparently, Paul Reeve has argued that Joseph Ball successfully passed as white. I interviewed Paul a while ago, and Paul has 2 amazing books. We're going to be talking about probably both of them today a little bit. Religion of a Different Color is his first book that really goes into priesthood ban. And then his new book, which is around here somewhere, just won the Best Book Award last year, This Abominable Slavery, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. And Paul argues, I think he has convinced me, I have changed my mind on this, he has convinced me that most people thought that Joseph Ball was white. His father certainly was a black man from Jamaica. I think he was mixed race. His father was as well. And so Joseph Ball was mixed race. But at any rate, the point is, he was appointed to be the branch president in Lowell, Massachusetts in 1844 by William Smith. So, I mean, that's kind of like being a bishop. So in 1844, clearly there were no restrictions against, the one-drop rule clearly didn't exist. And so Joseph Ball, he's kind of one of my heroes. I was hoping that I could find a picture, but I can't find I found a picture, but I don't know if it's legit. But at any rate, so that's a very cool story. And then the fourth one that I want to highlight, I think there's some more here, but these are the 4 that I kind of wanted to highlight. Q. Walker Lewis, he was an elder, baptized in 1843. So my favorite quote, William Appleby called him, quote, an example for his more whiter brethren to follow. So he was a very well-respected barber in Massachusetts also. In fact, I'm sure that Walker Lewis and Joseph Ball knew each other. I think they were in the same branch. Walker Lewis was a prominent abolitionist, and he worked for the Underground Railroad. He started an organization that led to the formation. It was a precursor to the NAACP. He was a master mason. There's some really cool stuff. Maybe I should write it. I don't think there's a very good, the problem is I'm not a very good historian, but I would love for a good biography on both Joseph Ball and Walker Lewis. I think that would be fantastic. So if anybody out there is listening, please do that. I would be very interested in that. So at any rate, my paper talks about interracial marriage as the catalyst for causing the ban to happen. So, and I probably should go into more detail than I am here, but I had AI help me with these slides. And I would flop those cases. I would put Enoch Lewis as case number 1, Warner McCary as case number 2. So I had mentioned William Appleby previously. So Enoch Lewis was the son of Walker Lewis, and both of them held the priesthood. And I believe I'm pretty sure it's William Appleby, records in his journal following the death of Joseph Smith that 2 black men kind of gave a funeral for Joseph Smith in Massachusetts, and we believe that it's Enoch Lewis and his father Walker Lewis. Enoch Lewis married a white woman in Boston and had a mixed race child, and that prompted severe disgust from William Appleby, who actually wrote to Brigham Young and asked if this was appropriate for blacks and whites to intermarry. About the same time, Warner McCary, I do have this book here. It's actually, I was just reviewing this book. I'm going to get rid of my slides here. But this is one of my favorite books ever. It's called Real Native Genius, How an Ex-Slave and White Mormon Became Famous Indians by Angela Pulley Hudson. I've tried not very hard to get her on. And this book's about 10 years old. This is a soap opera that you're like, can you make this stuff up? It's amazing. She's done some amazing work on this character. And I highly recommend this book. And I think, I'm not going to go into as much detail as I probably should, but clearly, and the slide has that he was an escaped slave. Actually, it's weirder than that. So Warner McCary, his mother was named of Frankie. I think her name was Frances, but she went by Frankie, apparently, or that's what her slave owner called her. So it appears that the slave owner impregnated Frances or Frankie, and then that's what caused Warner to be born. And when the slave owner died, he granted Frankie and I think 2 or 3 older children their freedom, and as part of his will, but also as part of his will, he did not free Warner McCary and instead gave ownership to Frankie and her other children. So it looks like he was not actually an escaped slave. It looks like he was mistreated by his mother, believe it or not. But he was manumitted or freed later. So he was actually a freed slave. He wasn't escaped. But he often posed as a Lamanite prophet. Honestly, that book is freaking amazing. Like the stories around Warner McCary are just, I don't think they can write soap operas like this. But anyway, what really caused the ruckus in winter quarters was Warner McCary married a white woman and began performing unauthorized sexual polygamist sealings with multiple white women in Iowa. And that caused great concern with Brigham Young. So Brigham definitely knew Warner McCary. There's some notes about a meeting, and Warner pretended to be Adam. It's a weird story, and oh my gosh, it's incredible. But once the other thing about Warner McCary, he pretended to be a Choctaw Indian. He said he wasn't black, but most people thought, you look pretty black to me. But at any rate, so you've got those two, and maybe another issue where Brigham Young gets reports from William Appleby about Enoch Lewis's marriage, and Young declares if they were far away from the Gentiles, they would all have to be killed. When they mingle seed, it is death to all. And so Brigham Young clearly, and in fact, it's funny because Brigham refers to Walker Lewis as a fine elder, an African, and then in 1847, and then in fact he mentions Walker Lewis to Warner McCary because Warner McCary said, "Am I cursed?" And Brigham said, "No, you're not cursed. We have a fine elder, an African in Boston," and he was referring to Walker Lewis because everybody thought Walker was amazing. So my slide's not moving for some reason. Here we go. So of course, in 1847, they are moving out to Utah. I love this map that AI made for me. That was fantastic. So out to the Utah Territory. And so the 1850 Compromise allowed Utah to choose whether to enter the Union as a free or a slave territory. And church leadership just wanted to punt. They didn't want to take a stand. As you can understand, between the northern states and the southern states, there was a lot of issues, and Brigham just didn't want to wade into that mess. And so this is from Paul Reeves' book and Christopher Rich's book and Lujan Carruth, This Abominable Slavery. There was the Pedro Leon Lujan trial in 1851. And so this kind of forced Brigham's hand. A judge rules that without a positive law, slavery cannot legally exist in Utah. And so this forces the all-white, heavily northern-born Utah territorial legislature to draft a formal labor laws. And so Brigham Young viewed his views to legalize servitude. Brigham Young, so it's important, I think one of the things about Paul and Chris and Lujan's book is a lot of people aren't very nuanced with this, but Brigham Young tried to be. Paul argues that he wanted to make slavery less onerous especially to the black people. And so, but he also understood, slavery is legal in America. We kind of have, even in California, California was a free state, but they still had slaves because it was not illegal to own slaves, even though California actually had more slaves than Utah ever did, even though California was a free state. And so Brigham Young tried to use this law, the Act in Relation to Service in 1852, to make slavery better for the slaves. And it was a form of gradual emancipation. Maybe I should go to the next thing before I give away the next slide. But the idea was he did want to protect Southern enslavers within the church. Charles Rich was an apostle, and he had some slaves, and so he wanted to make slavery possible. But he also wanted to be more humane about slavery. He really hated, with a passion, slavery, and he didn't like it. So he was kind of trying to do a compromise. Let's see. Here's a comment here from Ned. I don't know how you say your name, by the way. Mr. Meyer, I'll just say it that way. Can we trace any genealogy of these black men and women like Abel and Jane Manning James to existing families in the church today? Yes, and in fact, Elijah Abel's son, I think his name was Enoch Abel, and his grandson, Elijah Abel, both were ordained to the priesthood. And in fact, Elijah Abel, 2 generations down, I think was ordained in 1934, which I think is outstanding. I think I do understand. I believe Abel was kind of called a mulatto or a quadroon, which would mean 1/4 black. He was kind of light skinned. I think some of his family. I don't know the answer to that as well as I want to, but some of his family has left. Some of them, but even in 1934, Elijah Abel was ordained, and everybody knew that his grandfather was the black man Elijah Abel. So, and in fact, I'll just put a plug. I'm trying to go through. I was talking to my friend Matt Harris, and he says you need to go through Century of Black Mormons with a fine-tooth comb, and so I'm starting to do that, and I need to nail down those. That's a great question. I need to nail down those a little bit better. Let's see here. So let's talk a little bit about an act in relation to service. So one of the things that was put into the act was a free womb provision. By explicitly rejecting perpetual chattel slavery and crossing this out, children born to enslaved mothers were legally born free. And so that's kind of an upgrade from Southern, chattel slavery. All children would be born free. And so that gives an example of how this was kind of a form of gradual emancipation. Let's see, masters must send servants to school for at least 18 months. That was another provision. And so that was a sharp contrast to Southern slave codes that criminalized literacy. However, there was an anti-amalgamation clause. Amalgamation means mixed race marriage. There was severe criminalization of interracial sexual relations, punishable by massive fines and up to 3 years of imprisonment. Clearly, Brigham Young, and I will even add, Joseph Smith wasn't really a fan of interracial marriage either, but clearly Brigham Young thought it was awful. People guilty of that would get up to 3 years of imprisonment, entwining civil boundaries with Young's theological fears. Now, in the February 5th, 1852 legislature, this is also in this abominable slavery, Brigham Young is quoted from the George Watt transcription. George Watt wrote shorthand, "A man who has the African blood in him cannot hold one jot nor tittle of priesthood." So that's apparently actually what Brigham said. Some people have said one drop, and I know jot and drop sound similar. Wilford Woodruff recorded one drop. And so for basically until Paul's book came out, everybody's been talking about the one drop, but it was one jot or tittle. That's actually what Brigham Young said. And so to be more accurate, it looks like Wilford Woodruff got that, or misheard it or whatever. I don't exactly know. But yeah, that's actually what he said. So the context of this, Orson Pratt, who I think is kind of the hero of this story, was saying we can't legalize slavery in Utah. That would be terrible. Angels will blush, Pratt said. And also around this time in the legislature, Orson Pratt was arguing for black voting rights because the city of Fillmore, I think Cedar City, if I have that right, I think it's those two cities, maybe another one, just had the standard, in city corporations, and Orson Pratt voted no against both of those, and because they didn't allow black voting rights, which is mind-blowing to me that Orson Pratt was pushing back against Brigham Young this hard. And so that really led to this comment that Brigham Young said. And so in this same speech, Young explicitly admitted the novelty of the ban, stating, quote, if no other prophet spake it before, I say it now. So that indicates that there was no ban prior to 1852, and that's where everybody says the ban began really with this speech, because that's where Young, and it's in the context of a legislative fight, but that's where Young really put down the first codification of the ban. And so now you had to justify why, what is this curse? Which is funny because in 1847, Young is telling Warner McCary, hey, there's no curse. But then in 1852, now Brigham Young is blaming the curse on Cain's murder of Abel. And so a key detail in this, Young explicitly rejected because some people had said, well, maybe the blacks weren't valiant in the premortal life, or they were neutral in heaven. That's another one. Brigham Young explicitly rejected that blacks were neutral in the premortal life, and he taught that in 1869 all spirits come pure from the presence of God. And so the ones who were arguing for that whites were valiant and blacks weren't were Orson Hyde, Orson Pratt, and Bruce R. McConkie. And so this argument is black people exercised their agency poorly or were less valiant in the premortal war in heaven. And so those were kind of the two biggest. There's kind of also the curse of Canaan, which we'll talk about. But these were the two biggest justifications for why blacks couldn't hold the priesthood and couldn't go to the temple. I mean, I think a lot of times, we talk about the priesthood ban, but it was a temple ban as well. It wasn't just black men, it was black women that were prohibited from the temple. And I will also add, there are some other interracial marriages. Typically, one of the spouses was passed as white, but had quote unquote black blood. So there were other things even in this 1840 time period. I've got it in my paper. Maybe I should, once I get it ready, maybe I'll do that, present it or something. But and so these are the justifications, and that people have used, kind of argued, curse of Cain, premortal life, curse of Canaan. Those are the things. And I'm afraid, I don't know, but I'm afraid that some people, Bruce R. McConkie's Mormon Doctrine was such an influential book that I think some people still believe this to this day, and they shouldn't. So let's talk about the difference between Joseph Smith and Brigham Young. Under Joseph Smith, black men were ordained and proxy baptisms were allowed. Elijah Abel was baptized on behalf of his mother in the Mississippi River, or maybe it was Missouri River. I can't remember. I think it was Mississippi. I think it was in Nauvoo. And even Jane Manning James was allowed to do baptisms for the dead I think it was in the Endowment House. I don't think it was in the Salt Lake Temple. It might have been. I can't remember. I'll have to look at those details a little bit better. In the late 1890s, I believe it was. However, once 1852 hit, blacks were banned from the priesthood, and the restriction was codified in the 1852 legislative session that I mentioned earlier. Joseph Smith had personal discomfort, but there was no ban prior to 1852. Mixed race saints passed unpoliced. Joseph Ball is probably the best example of that. But following 1852, Brigham Young argued that it was that interracial marriage was a capital offense, and he had some severe rhetoric and even codified it in the Act in Relation to Service that the black and white intermarriage should not happen. Under Joseph Smith, black saints were assigned to favored tribes, like the tribe of Joseph, in the case of Joseph Ball, when he got his patriarchal blessing. I think I had that slide in and I took it out because I thought it was taking too long. Elijah Abel was declared an orphan, which I thought was really strange in his patriarchal blessing. And I believe Walker Lewis, if my memory is right, I think was of the tribe of Cain or Canaan. I can't remember. I have to double check that one. Actually, it's there on the Brigham Young. I think it was the tribe of Canaan. That was kind of the standard assignment for black people. Although I think that fluctuated, especially if a person passed as white, they could get adopted into one of the 12 tribes, the preferred 12 tribes. Joseph Smith, just before he died, his presidential platform advocated for compensated emancipation and education of slaves. The Brigham Young administration in Utah, they legalized unfree servitude and Indian indenture. One of the things that I think they put a time limit on it, is there a difference between indentured servitude and slavery? From a practical sense, not much. The really white people were indentured servants and black people were slaves, but they were treated very similarly. They weren't paid. I believe like Native American slavery in Utah, maybe I should call it indentured servitude, was supposed to last, I want to say no more than 20 years. But slavery, black slavery, could last a lifetime. Although it should be noted that Brigham Young did free some slaves too. He went out of his way to do that. So let's see. We've got some comments here. Nebhosa Meyer. I can't. Let me get my mouse to move here. Let's see here. What do you got? Do you think that it could be argued we were all, except for the noble and great, fence sitters in the war? I hate the whole argument. Who knows? Nobody was there. If we were that noble, we wouldn't need to come here. I think that's against Mormon doctrine. You'd have to, we're all supposed to get a body, and I mean even Jesus got a body. So I would say no. I don't agree with that argument. Book of Abraham. Is there evidence that God is at least beginning to lift the curse from Pharaoh? It seems like a redemption story that Abraham meets his arch enemy of the priesthood. Let me see. So I'm going to say no. I didn't, in this presentation, I didn't go into the book of Abraham, but I'm going to see if I can look this up here really quickly. There is a fantastic article by Alma Allred. Let me see. I've got a summary. There's a website. Here we go. Can I share my screen here? Can I put this in the chat? I'm going to try to put this in here. Anyway, it's called Using Scripts. There's a website called Mormon Heretic, Using Scriptures to Debunk the Priesthood Ban, and it references a chapter that Alma Allred wrote in the book called Black and Mormon, which is by Newell Bringhurst and Darren Smith. Let me stop sharing here for a minute. And let me see if I can figure out how to share my screen here. I always have to set this up beforehand or it doesn't work. But anyway, here, tell you what, I'm going to put this in the chat. It's going to be easier there. There's a link there. Oh, hopefully that might get toasted, and I think Facebook will have it, but sometimes YouTube doesn't like links. And so it might get deleted out of there. So check it on Facebook. Anyway, it's mormonheretic.org/04/11/using-scriptures-2-debunk-the-priesthood-ban. That's sorry, that's a long one. Maybe I can pop it in there. There you go. That's it. There's the link right there. So you can see it. Even if YouTube deleted it, there it's on the screen right now. It's a fantastic article. I know that Alma goes into the priesthood, into Abraham specifically. Let me see if I can find it here. The book here, this is quoting from Alma Allred. The book of Abraham states that the descendant of Canaan discovered the land of Egypt and that all Egyptians are descended from Canaan. That's in Abraham 1, 21, 22. The problem that is immediately apparent is the fact that Abraham and Joseph each married an Egyptian woman. One response offered to counter that damaging evidence has been that the Egyptians at the time of these marriages were Semitic Hyksos who had conquered Egypt and so were not really Canaanites. The explanation contradicts Abraham 1, 21, and 22. It also contradicts history. The Hyksos held power in Egypt for a maximum of only 150 years. If they were Egyptians during Abraham's lifetime, it is not possible for them to have still been in power in Joseph's day. I'm going to skip ahead here because I think he talks about, yeah, he does. Allred continues to note other discrepancies about Canaanites in the Bible and notes that Canaanites sometimes married Israelites. The Canaanite harlot Rahab was saved in Jericho and is an ancestor of Jesus. That's a problem. If you believe in a one-drop rule, that's a problem. Allred notes that the Edomites or the Canaanites were allowed in the congregation of Israel, Deuteronomy 23, 7 through 8. Moses also married an Ethiopian woman. From the Bible, Allred concludes on page 45, quote, "Little doubt remains that intermarriage between Canaanites and Israelites destroyed any chance for a pure non-Canaanite race among the chosen seed. 1/3 of the house of Judah is Canaanite, with an unknown portion among other tribes. What then can we make of the curse pronounced by Noah and Abraham's comments about Pharaoh's lineage? Could not have, quote, the right of the priesthood," that's in Abraham 1:27. "It may be that Mormons have simply misunderstood those passages of Scripture." Alma Allred says it was Abraham that had the right to preside over the priesthood rather than Pharaoh. He notes that Joseph and his son Ephraim had the right to preside even though they weren't of the tribe of Levi. I think that's pretty good. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Also on page 45, years after the right of the priesthood had been passed to Abraham, the pharaohs were feigning claim to it from Noah. They did not merely claim priesthood, they claimed the right to preside over the priesthood. Pharaoh, the son of Egyptus, established a patriarchal government in Egypt, but he was of the lineage by which he could not have the right of the priesthood or the right of the firstborn, which belonged to Shem and his posterity. In response to Pharaoh's claims, Abraham states, quote, "But the records of the fathers, even the patriarchs, concerning the right of the priesthood, the Lord my God preserved mine own hands." That's in Abraham 1:31. In other words, Abraham retained the right to preside over the priesthood. So, yeah, that is one of the things that people love to talk about, especially fundamentalist Mormons, because everybody points to Abraham 1:27, and I'm with Alma Allred on that. So, good to see you, Deb. Rainy Camp Nauvoo. Well, I'm sorry it's raining, but I hope you're having fun. All right, let me jump back to my presentation here. Great comments. Okay, so that's a picture of Jane Manning James, and I just want to make sure, too often in LDS discourse, when we talk about the priesthood ban as if it's a male-only ban, and we neglect the women. So Jane Manning James was a close friend of Joseph Smith. She lived in the mansion house. She was denied her temple endowment under the new ban. She was eventually forced into a restricted proxy sealing as an eternal servitor or slave. So because she pestered and pestered and pestered, she pestered Brigham Young, she pestered John Taylor. I think it was under John Taylor. That John Taylor said, okay, fine, you can't go into the temple, but we will seal you to Joseph, because Jane claimed on that, and I think there's some dispute in this. I need to read Max Mueller's book on J. Manning James, and I have read Quincy Newell's book, but I don't know if she covered that. At least I don't remember that she covered that. She did cover the sealing, but I don't remember whether. I think one or two of those two authors claimed that there's questions about whether. Jane claims that she was offered to be an adopted daughter of the Smiths, and that she turned it down, and so that was how she went to Brigham, and she went to John Taylor and said, "Hey, I wanted to change my mind on this. I'd like to be sealed as a child of Joseph and Emma." And John Taylor and Brigham Young didn't know what to do, and Taylor finally said, "Okay, we're going to do this one," and I think it's the only time it's ever happened. "We're going to seal you, Jane, as an eternal slave or servant to Joseph Smith." And Jane was, and so she couldn't even go in the temple for this. So somebody did it by proxy on Jane's behalf. Jane wasn't a fan of that. But anyway, so the point is, women weren't allowed to attend the temple either. And so that's an important thing. A couple other stories here. This is from Century of Black Mormons. William Leroy Tanner was the child of an 1877 mixed-race LDS marriage. Despite lifelong devotion and raising 10 children in the church, he was barred from priesthood. On his 1959 death record, a clerk wrote, "Negroes," with a question mark over his parents' names. I don't know, it's just terrible. And then Albert Webb and Alberta Walker were driven away, and we don't talk about this. How many black people left the church over the ban? These two were driven away by these institutional barriers. Webb left to become a state evangelist in a Christian church. Walker transitioned to the AME church to find the community and dignity denied to her by the LDS ban. One of the interesting things, I don't have it on the slide here, about the AME church, African Methodist Episcopal Church, there was a slave that was transported out of Utah to California. One of the things that Brigham Young's Act in Relation to Service said, you can't transport a slave without their permission. And my understanding is Biddy Mason was transported to California. She sued in California and won her freedom. And so she kind of has a sort of Mormon connection there, but she sued for her freedom in California and won, and started the first AME church in California. So that's kind of an interesting story as well. We talk about, there's people who left the church over this issue, and it's just terrible. So 1975, this is from Matt Book's Second Class Saints, and he talks about the tipping point being Sao Paulo, Brazil. And in 1975, the Sao Paulo, Brazil temple was announced. Faithful Black and mixed ancestry Latter-day Saints contributed heavily financially and labor to build the new temple. One of those is Helvicio Martins, who later became, in the 1980s, a general authority. He was a general authority 70. And so Matt argues in his book that the church had actually purchased some land under Harold B. Lee, who was very against the ban, or very pro-ban, I should say. He was very pro-ban, and everybody thought Lee was going to live forever, but Lee unfortunately died very young. And so President Kimball was kind of the unexpected president because he wasn't in good health. And so as soon as Kimball came in, I think it was in 74, Matt said on my podcast, Spencer Kimball knew that he was going to get rid of this ban, but he knew it was going to take some time. And so he took this land that was purchased in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and so announced a temple there. Well, one of the things about Brazil is everybody was mixed race, like everybody was, and the missionaries were going down there and, hey, do you have any pictures of your parents and grandparents? Like they would ask questions to find out if they could find any black people, and then they would be like, oh, well, we're not going to teach you, but, thanks anyway. It's a hideous policy. But anyway, that's what they did. But Kimball would send apostles down there like Bruce R. McConkie and other people and say, we've got a big dilemma here. These people are building a temple. They're going to be barred from entering the building. Interracial marriage is a big deal in Brazil. Like everybody has mixed race ancestry. How are we going to keep this policy going on? And then Bruce R. McConkie was like, I think we should get rid of the policy. And President Kimball was like, great idea. Elder McConkie, I'm glad you thought of that. So anyway, that interview with Matt is just amazing. I love how Matt tells it. And so that temple in Brazil, I think, plays an underappreciated role in helping to overturn the ban because, in 69, Matt talks about this as well. In 1969, Hugh B. Brown, and Matt's doing a biography on Hugh B. Brown. He just gave him an amazing presentation at Mormon History Association. I cannot wait. I think this Brown biography is going to be awesome. But Brown made several attempts to overturn the ban in 64, I think 62, 64, and 69. Almost got it happening in 69, but Elder Lee came back in town, and then instead of overturning the ban, they wrote a statement that was not signed by. It was December of 69. McCary was in horrible health, died in early January of 1970. So he couldn't even, he was in such bad health he couldn't even sign the paper. Lee got Brown and everybody else to sign the paper that said, hey, we don't know why the ban exists, but it exists, and kind of rubbed Brown's nose and everything. It was terrible. It's a terrible story. But at any rate, and so when Lee died, let's see, it was Joseph. So McCary died in 70. I think Joseph Fielding Smith lasted until 72. Lee took over in 72. Only lasted about 2 years, and I think that's when Kimball took over in 74, and then announced the temple in 75. And that was really, he was trying to get the apostles on board. I know Lee, Benson, Mark Peterson, Delbert Stapley, who was not an apostle but was in the first presidency. Those four were really key people in retaining the ban, especially in that 1969 story. So at any rate, another thing to consider, thousands of Nigerians in the 1960s were asking for Mormon missionaries to come. They asked President McCary, we want to join the church. Will you send missionaries? And then the Civil War happened and some things. But Ghanaians, same thing, wanted the church to come. And the church was like, God, we got these black people, but they can't have the priesthood. What are we going to do? And it was just a mess. It was just an absolute mess. Let's see. Got a comment here if I can figure out how to do this. Deb Hosa Meyer, hopefully I said that right. I would love the history of California Mormons. I would love that too. I think it would be fantastic. Samuel Brannon would be a big key factor in that one. So yeah, you should talk to Newell Bringhurst, although Newell's getting old. My friend Justin Martinez, if you're watching this, I volunteer you to do that. I think you live in California right now. There's lots of people in California that can do it. But anyway, I know that Justin, he just posted on Facebook that he just did something with Newell Bringhurst about race in California or something like that. But I think that would be fantastic. So at any rate, 1978, we finally got the revelation ending the ban. It ignited a worldwide immediate transformation. Not only were temples announced in Sao Paulo, but other diverse places. Young missionaries of African heritage flooded the earth to preach the gospel to every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. Faith blossomed across the African continent, growing from isolated congregation to hundreds of thousands of members. And so this kind of is a nice little thing about Official Declaration 2, June of 1978. President Kimball, the first presidency, and the 12 apostles spent hours supplicating the Lord in the upper rooms of the Salt Lake Temple. President Gordon B. Hinckley said, quote, there was a hallowed and sanctified atmosphere. A conduit opened up between the heavenly throne and the kneeling, pleading prophet. The Official Declaration 2 was canonized. It rescinds the restriction and extended priesthood and temple blessings to all worthy Latter-day Saint men and women. I will just add a couple of things. Fantastic book, the biography of Marion D. Hanks. I'm not remember the name of it, by Richard Hanks. That was a really fun interview. I gave a lesson about that about a year ago. It was fantastic. And Joseph Freeman was the first black man ordained in 1978, about a week or maybe even less time after he was ordained to the priesthood and sealed in the temple. That was a really fun interview. I did not know he lived in Utah. I thought he was in Colorado. When I found that out, that was really fun to get his firsthand experience. He was on Good Morning America and every network and everything. That was a really fun interview. And so I'm so grateful that the ban was overturned. Bruce R. McConkie, who was supported the ban for so long, and then once he turned, that kind of got the other apostles on board who were hesitant. Bruce R. McConkie said, "New light and knowledge erased previous limited understanding." And so I know President Kimball really thanked Elder McConkie for helping convince a few others about that. And so let's see, I guess I gave that quote a little bit earlier. Well, I'll read the whole thing again. "There was a hallowed and sanctified atmosphere in the room. Not one of us who was present on that occasion was ever quite the same after that." And that's what President Gordon B. Hinckley said. So President Dallin Oaks, our current prophet, said, I think he was the president of BYU at the time. He said, quote, "I sat down on a pile of dirt. We had been moving and beckoned to my sons." He was at his, he was doing yard work at his mountain retreat when he got the news. "As I told them that all worthy male members of the church could now be ordained to the priesthood, I wept for joy." And I won't play it now, but he mentioned that in the B1 celebration. A listener helped me get tickets, and I thought that was fantastic. I don't have this really queued up here, but anyway. During the recent April 26th General Conference, Quentin Cook reaffirmed the pivotal nature of priesthood keys in our modern era. He emphasized that the sealing keys restored by Elijah in the Kirtland Temple are the literal mechanism that allows for exaltation. The ultimate goal of the gospel plan is implemented through mortal families who are destined for eternity. And so, the temple is where we get we get to exercise all that priesthood with the sealing keys from Elijah. Elder Cook talked more about the sealing keys and the restoration of the priesthood. So the restoration of the Melchizedek priesthood, the return of the sealing keys, and the 1978 revelation all serve one divine objective. The priesthood is not merely about administration, it is about redemption, healing, and connection. The gospel of Jesus Christ is not a wedge to divide families, but a bridge to unite them eternally. I believe that's also what Elder Cook said. So, and I love this scripture from the Book of Mormon, from 2 Nephi, I believe it is. I believe it's chapter 32, if I have it right. That all God's children, black and white, bond and free, male and female, are invited to partake in his salvation. And we're all invited to walk the covenant path, bound to God forever. So, just want to make sure, if it's not clear, this is in the Gospel Topics essays. Church leaders today unequivocally condemn all racism, past and present, in any form. And I just want to make sure everybody knows black skin is not, the idea that black skin is a sign of disfavor or a curse has been disavowed. The past teachings that black skin reflects unrighteous actions in the premortal life, disavowed. Mixed race marriages is a sin, that has been disavowed. And the idea that blacks or other people of any race or ethnicity are inferior to anyone else has been unequivocally condemned. And I hope that we can get past all this none of these explanations, the curse of Cain, the curse of Canaan, premortal valiance, all of those are not accepted as official doctrine of the church. The curse of Cain was a Protestant idea from the 1730s, arguing that black individuals descended from the biblical Cain and dark skin was God's mark. That's not LDS doctrine. The curse of Canaan was widely used in American culture to justify black servitude as a curse on Noah's grandson. That has been disavowed. And the premortal valiance theory was a turn of the century theory claiming that black individuals were less valiant than in the premortal battle against Lucifer. That has been disavowed as well. So anyway, whoops. Oh, good. Let's see. Let me stop sharing. And so anyway, I hope I've made that super duper clear. Like I said, I've been working on a couple of writing projects, and this was one of them I was actually working on today, and I thought, I want to talk about this today. So, is there another section added to the Doctrine and Covenants besides the priesthood one that same year? It would be cool to do a study of their collective influence on the church. Yeah, there were actually two, section 137 and 138. I know that 138 is it was the Joseph F. Smith revelation that talked about the spirits in prison. It was a vision that Joseph F. Smith had. I'd have to look up DNC 137 because I don't remember what that one was about. That one was also added that same year. This was a vision given to Joseph Smith the prophet in the temple at Kirtland on January 21st, 1836. The occasion was the administration of ordinances in preparation for the dedication of the temple. So that was also another, I guess maybe I could slide that over. Can you see that? Oh, you can't. Maybe. Nope, still can't see it. Try. All right. So, yeah, that would be interesting. I think that's a great idea. So, anyway, it was great having you on. If you have any other questions, let me know. But that went a tiny bit long. I've only got like 45 minutes. We've got a couple weeks, I'm only going to have about 45 minutes to do this, so I'll probably have to cut that a little bit. And I didn't even get any good quotes in there from Oaks. I mean, I kind of did, but I usually like to play video clips. So anyway, it's great having you all on at LDS Faith Journeys and Gospel Tangents. And just want to remember June is Restoration of the Priesthood Month, at least here, kind of a Gospel Tangents. So hope you enjoyed that presentation. It was great having you all on, especially since, I never announce these things because I never know if I'm going to get them done on time. But I barely got it done. So great having you all on, and we will talk to you all later.